Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to NestCast Live. It's October 29th, 2020, and my name is Jim Chu in San Francisco, California. Here at NestCast Live, we discuss topics relevant to investing and entrepreneurship in emerging markets. And we do it with entrepreneurs and investors with first-hand experience on those topics. Thanks to Zoom, we're able to involve audiences from around the world. And to that point, I want to stress that this isn't a webinar. It's a Zoom meeting where we can all participate. This is an interactive session, and we've left it open on purpose so that we can get your opinion. Do note that this conversation is recorded and will be available after the show on our YouTube channel and as a podcast. You can find links to subscribe to both at findthenest.org. Well, before we get started, just a few quick announcements. First announcement is please join us next week on November 5th. We have a triple header session with Sunkalp at the Global Summit. And we also have another Nest the same day with Invest Africa. We have a third Nest on the same day with a Francophone Nest with yet another partner. So please come back to that. You'll be able to find all the various links on our website, findthenest.org. All right, let's head over to the panel now. We're very fortunate to have a very experienced group of local East African investors on our panel today. Dhruv, would you like to start with introductions?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me, Jim. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to the audience as well. I'm Dhruv Pandit, third generation Indian extraction, but fully Kenyan, if I can put it that way. Been a former banker, insurer, and now in my third career as a real estate family-owned business. We're into retail, hospitality, commercial, and a little bit of residential as well. And really, my started angel investing about 2 to 3 years ago. Had a wonderful mentor, and very much enjoying the scene in East Africa, investing in tech startups of various kinds. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but startups that have real solutions for Africa. Thank you.
Great. And we'll definitely want to hear from you about how you made that transition from more traditional investments to the startup scene. All right, over to you, Vishal.
Hello, everybody. Jim and the Nest crew, thank you for having me back. To Tonee, Peter, and Dhruv, delighted to be on with you. My name is Vishal Agarwal. I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya as well. Former partner of PwC, ran the deals business across the region. Former leader of GE, and for the last 3 years, have built and run a proprietary investment firm. I do three things, hopefully well. I run a proprietary venture capital portfolio. I've been an angel investor for a long time. I've got roughly 36 portfolio companies. I'm exposed to some commercial real estate, although nobody compared to the Pandit family run by Dhruv Pandit, who is the king of real estate in our backyard. And then I am a late career enthusiast in hospitality, and I have a growing interest in hospitality. Just perhaps because of my love for food. So that's me.
Great. And yeah, I'll definitely want to hear from you on your migration over to tech investing as well. Tonee.
Thanks so much for having me. It's nice to be here as well. Good to see everyone. Hoping that you can all see and hear me. So my background is education technology. Before that, I was involved in the incubator space. Started the Nile Lab about 10 years ago, and together with Eric Hersman and iHub, we kind of created a bit of a buzz in East Africa on content creation. I stepped into angel investing about 4 years ago. Myself raising capital. I know that, as you grow from the 25,000 to the 50,000 to 150 and $1 million rounds, there's a lot who are just looking for 5,000, 15, 20, 25,000. So I've participated in helping some rounds for those small companies. predominantly in education technology, but also in other tech ventures. I've been able to see and exit one of those companies, which was, a very profitable endeavor, which I'm very happy about.
Congratulations.
And happy to talk about small investing, because a lot of the times people are talking about or thinking about larger budgets, larger amounts of money, but then, you can walk in with 5,000, walk out with 9,000, and that's not too bad. And there's a lot of those going. So I think there's an opportunity to talk about smaller investments that average folk can be able to do as well. Happy to be here, and I look forward to the conversation.
Fabulous. Thank you. Thank you for coming back. I know you were on a NestCast Live a previous month as well. And over to you, Peter.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Nice to be here. This is such a strong panel. I like it. My history, I always like, Jim, I told you, I always like to start with, I am a farmer's kid who just happened to have the advantage to kind of travel the world. Very fortunate to have started, as a serial entrepreneur, started different companies. I was with Tonee back in the day. I was running Brick, which is one of the early companies that came out of the iHub. At some point, I realized that a lot of the companies that were raising money in Africa did not look like people like me. So I decided to kind of like jump into kind of like investing into more kind of local teams. And it's been such a good ride over the last 3 years. What I think we do well is at Alibud is a growth strategy for early stage startups and funding interventions. Some of our money and most of the other times is kind of bringing other money from outside. And super excited about this conversation. So back to you, Jim.
Great. Well, thank you and welcome back again. Well, now over to the topic. So how do we engage local investors in funding local startups? VC for tech in Africa really is starting to ramp up, but much of that funding still comes from non-African investors. That leads to a number of issues, one of which is the overrepresentation of non-African founders getting funded, as we discussed a couple of months ago on this program. But I would argue, more importantly, we're missing an opportunity. Local investors can bring a much deeper understanding of the market to the investment ecosystem than foreign investors certainly ever could. And personally, I tend to be a bit suspicious of deals where there are too few or no local investors at all. So here in the US tech startup world, the role of angel investors has been really critical to the success of the tech ecosystem over the last several decades. I guess the question is, can we do the same thing in Africa with local angels and investors, or are we relying on DFIs, God forbid? So the question really is, how do we engage more local investors to invest in local startups? And perhaps the best first question for this panel, why are you investing in local startups? And how does it compare to your other investments? Who'd like to start?
I'm happy to go first. So the history behind angel investing for me is, as a PwC partner, I always had a conflict. I had some form of conflict in sort of a regulated entity, a capital markets entity, a mutual fund. And I learned very quickly it was not for me. So I began to, and the only other asset class is lazy real estate, although Dhruv is probably cringing at me. So it just made me want to invest in startups and back entrepreneurs, because I felt that it was a little more gratifying. I could open up my Rolodex and networks to them, etc. As I decided to kind of exit my corporate life, I thought that that was a pretty good sweet spot, because I could, in some ways, without sounding patronizing, I felt that I could bring some adulthood to the boardroom, or help the young founders sort of grow and connect. I was also very kind of sensitive and cognizant of the fact that there were expat founders in our region that were able to raise more funding quicker because they had better connectivity, better networks than sort of African founders. So those are some of the things that are really important to me, and I've tried to focus on, and then perhaps use my networks and relationships to open doors for founders, to grow their revenue line, to increase their brand, and more importantly, prepare themselves for the next round of funding. I'm fairly focused on my investment thesis. I'm a sort of a seed to a A-round investor. I try not to digress before seed, and I try not to stay after A. So that's kind of where I play, and I feel that that's perhaps where local investors could add the most value in preparing African startups for the next generation.
So you have a very strong network in East Africa, Vishal, with, you know, you're a founder of the Capital Club, and I believe you're involved with Thai as well. Have you seen many other investors make that transition, or what's the general mentality or sentiment among other investors, local investors?
Look, it's changing. I think a lot of people on this call would say that it has changed and fairly rapidly. So maybe 10 years ago, 5 years ago, it felt more lonely than it's feeling today. And the fact that we've got Dhruv here, and Dhruv, I've got to say, is the Africa chair for YPO. YPOers are pretty good investors in this space as accomplished, seasoned business people that run large businesses across the region, let alone in Africa. This brethren of mine, this fraternity of YPOers, make for a very good investor group. And I see more and more YPOers angel investing, venture investing. I've just started a forum within YPO for venture capital investors, and I've got more entries than I can handle. And Dhruv and I just set up a WhatsApp group a couple months ago for Africa-focused YPO investors, and I can't recall, but we must have 2-3 dozen participants in that. So that just shows me more and more investment interest, and because these are credible, seasoned business people, it fills me with confidence that they would give more to the founders as opposed to take more from these founders.
Gotcha. So now you mentioned Dhruv several times, so I'm eager to hear from you, Dhruv. I know you're the African chapter president of YPO. Is there a generational thing going on here?
Yeah, I mean, thanks, and thanks, Vishal. And full disclosure, he is my agent, and he does get 10% of all my revenues. No, of course he doesn't.
10% of zero is nothing, right?
Thanks for the pitch. Yes, lazy real estate. Maybe I should answer your first question about why am I in it, and it'll give you a broader context back to your question about is there a generational thing. Why am I in it is I certainly recognize that I didn't want to do in my 50s what I'm doing in my 40s at the moment. Don't get me wrong, I love real estate, but I needed something more to stretch. And I'm in one of those organizations where it's lifelong learning, but I don't learn unless I have skin in the game.
Right.
So, but part of it was actually making the return, of course, and putting some money on the table. But for me, there's actually no downside. And back to Tonee's point, you don't have to come in with huge amounts of money in Africa. It is money you can actually afford to lose completely. But from my point of view, I'll have learned something. I really take that design thinking into what I do. So you don't actually go out to succeed; you actually go out to learn something. And I think another key point for me is you can actually add huge amounts of value just through your networks and avoiding pitfalls. So just to give you a very quick case study, recent investment came in initially with a safe note of only 10,000, converted later on to 50,000 of equity. Few of my friends and family did it as well. But what actually happened, they hadn't even thought of Mauritius as a holding company destination, and they still wanted to go Pan-Africa wide, more or less. So just by helping that structuring, with a close colleague who knew how to do them, gave them a straight deal straight away for corporate services, just avoided so much headache down the line. Mm-hmm. So avoiding pitfalls, adding networks, referrals for launch customers. Say you're in you want to test it out on 5,000 employees. I've got, in my network, several friends and family who love trying out new stuff. So why not say be the launch trial customer for this minimum viable product? So to give that context, yes. And the other thing is, I think generationally, a lot of money has been made, but people have recognized that their business models need to evolve. They don't know where to necessarily move into the tech world, but the new generation is also saying, well, we don't actually have to do it ourselves. We can invest in the other founders and startups, and let's put some money aside. It's, these days it's the equivalent of buying a machine, for example. And before, if you knew the older generation, the more machines you had, the more successful you were. These days, of course, it's all about efficiency and how can you do more with less? And isn't that the service world we're in? And collaboration and ecosystems. So it is a lovely new thing that's coming together. And let me add one last point, if I may. Fun. It's actually much more fun to be with a great group of people. And the East Africa startup scene, I have found in the last year, be it founder, investor, entrepreneur, regulator even, if I can put it this way, everybody's out there to help each other and refer contacts, business, thought processes. It is so collaborative, you will not believe. And that's what I love about it. Thank you, Jim.
Great, no, thank you. So Tonee, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, and especially how you got into, well, I suppose you've been in tech investing for quite a bit longer as well.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm just going to backtrack onto the conversations that both Mr. Pandit and has spoken about, and also Vishal has mentioned. The two things about investment that are really critical to understand is the history of investment. So the two gentlemen who've spoken before me have had the good fortune of having that generational wealth creation process that has been built in their families that then becomes an industrial lead. It allows them, it gives them that head start. Now for African families, we don't necessarily have that. My father is a dentist, my mom's a pharmacist. Before that, their parents were farmers, and that was it. And we are the first generation of entrepreneurs that have had any experience trying to build companies in countries that are still young and still learning how to grow and accommodate businesses. And so that's problem number one. Problem number two, when it comes to finance, which again, I'm going to touch on, is the difference between entrepreneurial capital and generational capital is experience. And with more experience comes less risk. So in the same manner that you see if you look at the American, for example, the American ecosystem, one of the biggest believers in it is Steve Case. And we all know Steve Case was part of the AOL Time merger, one of the biggest mergers of its time. And I think 12 years after that, it was huge. And the whole thing collapsed, but then he still walked away with a decent amount of money and had this thing of failure isn't a fault. Failure is an experience, which is something that I know we've talked about in a bit. And that's something that Kenyan EdTech and Kenyan tech founders have really still getting to learn that failure is something you can easily talk about and grow past and move on with. But then it's not something that Kenyan investment communities understand. So even as we talk about WIPO and all the impact that older generational investors may have, and definitely Mr. Pandit has spoken about this in a bit, there's a sense of hunger that has to balance out with a sense of risk. Well-run businesses, well-run systems, well-informed and educated investors are not necessarily the best thing for African markets because the risk factor is so high that it's very difficult for anybody to be able to put a number to the number of companies that will exit in a certain period of time. That's my second point. But my third point on fundraising and capital in the Kenyan ecosystem, and I'll point it out very clearly. We are very open, very welcoming, very warm, and very kind people. And that provides opportunities for, it doesn't matter where you're from, foreign founders to come here. The language is English, the culture is welcoming, the people are hospitable, and the opportunities are glaring. For them to come here and bring, whether it's networks from Carnegie Mellon or Stanford or Harvard or Columbia or Oxford, and bring the money that comes with it and run a business that is identical to a Kenyan-led business that doesn't have as much network, resource, and influence, and then raise capital and lots of it and turn a business out of it. And I think one of the things we are missing that is underlying is that connection, is that ability for Tonee, a Kenyan of African descent, to be able to sit down with Nikul Shah, a Kenyan of Indian descent, and have a business conversation. And Nikul introduces him to the guys at Capital Club, some of American descent, some of Caucasian or Asian descent. And they all look at Kenya, as Tonee, as a business person and not as a Kenyan of dark skin descent, and give him the money that he believes he needs to be able to run the business the way he runs. He needs to run the business for it to be successful. And that's what we have not succeeded at doing. We have not succeeded at getting cross-racial financing. We have not succeeded at getting cross-economic, cross-social financing. And for a guy who, over the last year and a half, has raised $1.5 million for his business, being able to say that absolutely none of that money came from Kenya is really a disappointment for me, because I know we are very many Kenyans who are going to get an opportunity to go and present in front of local investment communities and international investment communities and get 10 times more feedback from international communities, from people who don't even know us and where our countries are, than it is to get local investment. And that's something we really, really need to fix if we're going to have an impact in not just this ecosystem, but the East African one, because Kenya is by far at the forefront of technology in this continent, not just in this region, but in the continent. And there's a lot to be said about Paystack in Nigeria, for example, getting $200 million from I forget, maybe Skrill, I've forgotten the name.
Stripe.
Because from Stripe, there you go. Because they had a system that has been implemented and built in Kenya by Pesapal. Why is it that all of a sudden Paystack is the lead, and we should be the lead, because we have, if anything, the best digital currency ecosystem on the planet with M-Pesa. So those are the conversations we need to have. And the more we have them, the more we realize that there are good investments in Kenya that can make money in this country, that can move us forward in this continent, and we just need to do them. Thanks.
So the question then is how? How do we establish that local ecosystem?
Sorry, can I interrupt you? Before we move on, I've got to kind of respond to Tonee, because presumptuous. I am not third generation Kenyan Asian. I came to the region with nothing. I was a zero. I am a zero. I might have few more zeros, but those zeros were as a result of all the hard work that I did and not my daddy. And that's part of this assumption and presumption that we have to stop amongst ourselves and kind of say, look, when we find a startup that is incredible, just like our farmers, we are quick to export it to the valley. When a farmer doesn't bring the best fruit and vegetable to my dining table, the startup founder is not doing the same. So are we as founders, as a community, engaging our corporates, our local backyard? We must ask ourselves that question, right? So I think it is not just, oh, these guys are not investing in us and they want value investments, but also, are the founders attracting the right guys to mentor them to the next level, or are they disappearing just like vegetables and fruits to Marks and Spencer's if they get that choice?
So I want to pass it over to Peter here. He has a chance to jump in. And my original question was, what got you into to tech startup investing, and how is it compared to other investments? But you're coming at this from a slightly different angle. You were an entrepreneur, and once you became a successful entrepreneur, then you started investing in other entrepreneurs. I mean, that's the more typical route in the U.S. tech space. How do you see this?
So Jim, I think I'll add on to everyone's point. I was very lucky to have spent 3.5 years in Austin, Texas. And I think that is kind of the city that has a lot of Vishal type people, right? And I think, people who, it's...
you mean people with many zeros? Is that
many
right?
zeros, but it's the first, they're the first generation many zeros. And, I also, so if I look at it from my point of view, the average yearly income of someone who lives in Nairobi is $3,000. If they live outside Nairobi, it's even worse, right? So we have this situation where, as someone who wants to support the ecosystem, I am sent to like Nairobi Innovation Week, and I can tell you, I've never seen any company succeed that never found $50,000 of its own money somewhere, friends, family, fools, never. So we are asking the smartest people in the continent to do what other people, someone like me dropping in from Austin, I can call my friends and family and figure out where the first 50K is coming. But the smartest people in the continent that is Africa do not have access to this first $50,000. That's the problem we are trying to solve here. Now, so I'll start with Mr. Pandit, because like my family at some point was really into real estate, right? But I think for the first time, and this is everywhere in the world, time and chance always happens. For the first time in literally 50 years, real estate has stopped to be kind of the place that you go every time. So I went to school with some guys who run PwC, and in our own circles, they would say, okay, these are all the different places you can invest. But for the last 20 years, they said, but after we give you that big, long presentation, real estate is still the place to go. It's the safest. You have low taxes, so there was not a straight line to get any money in East Africa out of real estate into other forms of investment. And for the last 4 years, I think the asset class that is real estate has changed so significantly that you're starting to see money move back into other forms of investment. To Tony's point, I think, I was at the iHub when Steve Case visited. I was there when Mark Zuckerberg visited. These are the kind of people we want to see investing, but I think that money keeps getting channeled to people who don't look like me. So here is where, to answer your question, I started asking myself, where are companies in 10 years? Not at year zero, because 93% of the money at year zero, stories to be told in Africa will be real estate companies like which are local. Centum, which is super huge and mostly local money. Cellulant, which is started by a Kenyan and a Nigerian. Paystack, Africa Stocking. So I started asking myself this question: if we are not supporting local founders at year 1, but we are celebrating them at year 10, aren't we doing the ecosystem such a disservice by not investing them sooner? So that was my aha moment. Is kind of, how can we mobilize money to that first 50,000 to like Vishal says, find a team that has traction. That's it. And and he said this, you're starting to see that it's no longer a lonely place. That is starting to kind of like a move. And to Tony's point, Nigeria is the one place that I really love, because they don't go outside the country for any checks under $250,000. And that's how you get the local founders at some point to exit, and a lot of that money stays in Africa. Some of the biggest IPOs we've had out of Africa, the Jumias, they made no money literally for most of the people who work there, right? We want to see at year 10, when these companies start paying out checks, we need to have all of us making money. And when I say all of us, there's nothing wrong with somebody else making money, but at least some of that money needs to stay in the continent.
So it recycles back into the ecosystem. So I mean, you guys are all very, yes, please.
No, I just wanted to make 2 quick points. And this is not a generational or a thing. I think even if you look at Kenya, of any ethnicity, a Kenyan or any ethnicity with wealth, actually family business is the only institutional capital available, if you think about it, for startup funding, because the other traditional pools of capital in more mature markets, your pension funds, your insurance companies, all of those sorts of things are so heavily regulated. They haven't even put a dime into PE funds, forget angel and VC. All right, so just that huge chunk of capital is just unavailable. So who's left as patient capital? It's actually family business. Now, Peter's absolutely right. Traditionally, Real estate is where it all went, whether you're a manufacturer or whatever, you made some money, you put it into real estate. Now, over the last few years, it's changed. I think there's a generational thing as well. But I also want to make the point that I've got the REITs Association of Kenya coming in to me. I've got this come to me, but I've never had, or I've never, and even in my circles, I've never had iHub or, in Nairobi Week or any of these guys actually showcasing and saying, hey, why don't you come to this? Even just hear what's going on. We never get invited, and there's a massive gap. Like, I hear about these things about Salmkalp, for example, from this intro today. Surely I should have heard it about my own backyard from my own networks. It hasn't happened. So there's a massive communication gap of, if you want my money as a family business, come and market to me. It doesn't happen.
So there's an audience member who's commented that there are, Raj in particular, Raj Kulasingham, I know Nigerian founders who are wary of taking local money. Is there wariness about taking local money?
Can I respond to? Let me just quickly swing in some good vibes. First of all, Vishal, I totally appreciate zero to hero stories. I love that, and you've done amazing, and I'm definitely impressed by you. I've known about you before I saw you on this call. You might have even seen a LinkedIn suggestion like maybe a couple of weeks ago. So that's a big win. But then. And then also I will answer about the family money and the networks in the same statement. I think there's two challenges that we have as an ecosystem in Kenya for Kenyan founders, Black, brown, and everything in between. The first one is that business relationships are built on a business level. So to a very practical statement, Mr. Pandit just said, how come I don't hear about Sankap and I don't hear about all these events that are happening? Well, it's because the networks that I am in as Tonee Ndungu and the networks you're in, there's a difference because the networks were built for specific reasons. And I will make the assumption that the network you're discussing and the network you are in is a network that is built around certain investments, decisions, or personal preference. And mine is of a similar fashion. And so when, for example, Barack Obama came and there was GES, he was what we call a network demolisher, in that everybody had a reason to want to network and work with him. And then when he pointed attention to entrepreneurship as a discussion, there were more people that came into the conversation. But there are not enough Obamas in our community locally to be able to create that conversation. So that then, now to the question that Jimmy asked, is reduces or dissolves good trust metrics. And those trust metrics, especially when you're investing in a company, are formed in two ways. Either it is borrowed, so because someone knows me and that someone knows you, you give money to me against that borrowed trust factor. Or the second one is if it is underwritten. So for example, I give you some form of property or convertible note, which then is underpinned by a certain law, like the Kenyan law. And because you believe in the Kenyan law, you know, because we've signed a contract, this contract can be held up in court and I'm liable to a certain amount of money. And Kenya doesn't necessarily provide that for international financiers, let alone, for Kenyan financiers, let alone financial and international ones. So because the second one is not necessarily something within our control, the first one is the one we rely on. And so my answer to why isn't there enough trust in our communities is, again, to agree with what Mr. Pandit said, we are not building those relationships. We are not taking the time to lobby for those relationships. We're not taking the time to find a way to get into Capital Club and have those presentations. And why? Well, it is because we have cultured ourselves to looking for VC money from San Francisco, for PE money from the UK, from grant funding from IFC and the Dutch government and all these places. We haven't been exposed to this mindset. And that's one of the reasons why iHub and the NILAB and all these labs started, is because we wanted to show that there are more avenues for us to raise capital than the ones we know. But sadly, we have businesses to run and just don't have that networking capacity within us to be able to create these conversations. So I do take responsibility, both as a founder and as an ecosystem, for not creating that environment for ourselves and others. But I will say that there is room for us to do more if all of us are involved, vis-a-vis the young folk looking for money, finding the young folk who have money, or older folk who have money, depending on how you feel in your spirit.
So
But that's where
a,
I think we are.
So that's a good dovetail over to the fact that there are several people on this panel who are part of very large organizations, both very formal and also informal. With you, Vishal, founder of the Capital Club, a great place to network. I think, Tonee, you have an accelerator. Dhruv, you're obviously part of YPO. Is there an opportunity to put some of these networks together and create very consciously, versus very haphazardly, some of these networks to encourage that discussion about investing in tech?
Can I jump in real quick, Jim?
Sure.
So yes, and the answer to that is the people in this room need to do that very actively. Even during COVID times, myself and a few friends started a think tank, because Africa really does not have think tanks, right? We have other people from outside the continent being around. It's not the way it should be. Going to Tony's point on kind of like Obama and GES, the company, Brick is a 2018 Time Magazine most genius company in the world, right? So we were invited for this event, but we got 2 tracks. There was like the international, you belong to, like you're being invited by the US Embassy or something like that. And there was the Kenyan track. So our company got 2 tickets to GES, maybe for about 6 people. The people who went in through the Kenyan track, their tickets were not processed in time to actually meet Obama, right? So even in times when we are all being herded in the same, there's still a hierarchy of who got to get into the room and who didn't get into the room. And you're all going to the same place. So we need to be very intentional about bringing these networks together. And
Yes.
when you bring the networks together, there needs to be like an equalizer. Let's try and figure out, because some people will come with a lot more than others, but I want to loan my privilege to somebody else, because that's how we're going to lift people up.
And I just want to make a comment there, speaking as a international investor, right? Yes, I just see an overdominance of international capital in these markets. And I made a joke about DFIs in the past. I made a joke about, just having foreign founders and the number of LPs who are basically international investors. I think that's the issue here, right? Because as long as the money is flowing from these sources, people will be setting up conferences targeting those sources. So until there is that conscious initiative to pull together capital locally so that it can be representative and therefore have the power to move the needle, I think that's only then will things change. And I think things will have much better investments and much better outcomes when we have local investors involved. So I want to kind of switch the conversation more into the how do we do this? So I think, noting your comments and everyone's comments here, we need a conscious effort to do this and bring together the networks within the country. How do we do it? And the people in this room seem to be the ones with the capability and the networks to do that.
May I make a suggestion?
Yes.
So first of all, exactly what we're doing right now, Jim. Having Dhruv, having Vishal, having myself, making sure that Peter is involved. This is what we need to do. We need to have these conversations and be able to look each other in the face and be like, this is a fight and a journey we can all do ourselves together, and we can succeed in doing it. So the first thing is that conversation. But the second one is understanding that we are businesses. And at the end of the day, what we all care about is that bottom line. Being able to find a way to create impact is also very valuable, obviously, because entrepreneurs are driven by that. But looking at somebody like my good friend Ken Joroge, I was there in the warehouse when he was putting together Cellulant, and I was thinking through the NILAB, and he helped me out a lot because he's a little bit of my senior in age. And watching him do what he did and knowing the grit that got him there, watching him over a 12-year period, is the kind of grit I have because he stood before me. And the younger people who are coming after me, this is the kind of grit I will give them, because we are teaching each other how to move forward. Now, being able to add Vishals to that, being able to have Mr. Pandit to that, being able to add Peter to that, for me, allows me then to become an even better shoulder to stand on for those who come after me. So that mentorship and that business acumen is important. But the last one, and I think this is the most important one, is putting our money in the conversation, is being able to say, you know, I have X amount of money, from $5,000 to $500,000, it doesn't matter. And literally put yourself in that game. Whatever it is you're going to invest in, do the investment. Let me give you a practical example, going back to GES. I was one of the young folk fortunate to meet Obama when he was here. And when I got back to the States 2.5 years later, when Kitabo was looking for another round of funding against Still Seed Capital, again, I was invited to the White House and I was able to speak to him. What made it possible for me to do that is because we managed to build relationships that were long-term, because people cared enough to put money in us and then go ahead and talk to people about us. And that's exactly what we need. We need folk to be like, you know what, Tonee, I'm committed to what you're doing, or Peter or Jane or Grace or whoever is in the ecosystem. And I'm going to give you my money because I don't necessarily think you're going to give me back to me in 2 weeks, but I do know what I'm going to get in 2 months or 2 years is going to be beneficial for the two of us. So let's put our money in. Let us show faith in this ecosystem. Let's participate. And I guarantee, at least speaking from my experience, from those I've invested in and the people I know in this space, I know that there's going to be a worthwhile return for that investment. That's how I think we could go forward.
Okay, so to a certain extent, we're preaching to the choir here, because I think most of us in this room believe that. How do we pull in others into that conversation and convince them? Dhruv?
Yeah, no, thanks. I completely agree with Tonee. It's how do we bridge the gaps, and the practical way is stuff like this, right? I'd call this a mini virtual conference, and many more of these would help. But I would also think is celebrating the successes. If we had a case study of successful exits, right? Pitch to the right family businesses, the local investors, doesn't matter. Again, I'm going to emphasize this point, what race, ethnicity, whether you came at year 0 or year minus 150, doesn't matter. The point is showcase these successes. They're too few spoken about. In fact, they're more spoken about outside of Africa than within Africa, in my view, right? So if you put 2 or 3 of the founders together with a case study and say, hey, this worked for us. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I'm on my second startup because of ABCD, right? Those trust gaps that Tonee talks about will be bridged very, very quickly, in my view. And I just also say from the founder side, one of the companies I invested in is so happy he's got local investors. He's got a great blend of local and foreign, right? And why? Because try doing a capital raise during COVID and trying to explain the Kenyan ecosystem on Zoom just didn't work. His capital raise, his bridge funding, what got him through this tough period until he could actually fly out to the US and UK and get that growth capital, was because he had a strong set of local investors. And let me also say, Tonee's back to his point about different business relationship circles. This guy, the person who put in some of his biggest initial capital was his landlord. He was actually looking for offices, went in there, and they struck a thing. And it's like his landlord actually gave him money. So sorry to bring that real estate lazy side back again, but actually, if you look at who are your business partners and relationships as a founder, even if you're a small founder, you'd be surprised as to how much money would be available. It's just you've got to look through it at a different lens a little bit, in my view. And again, case studies.
Vishal, what can we do with a capital club?
We'll go visit. Join. Look, I see Raj actually sort of asking multiple times governance and transparency, and look, I think that's, so if I could pick up on that,
okay.
That's very important to me, and let me explain why. So look, as a PwC partner, what was really important to me was the investment in local talent, right? And it really offended me to be called local by some office in the United Kingdom, or some office in New York, or someone in Dubai. You local teams, they said, and that really, really offended me, right? So how do you get to be international sitting in London and I get to be local? And I think the way I I try to model that in my career life, and I'm coming to the startup scene, is by demonstrating our risk and compliance and our quality and standard was like no place else. That there were no compromises, there were no shortcuts, there was nothing lenient because we were local, right? It was of the same standard. And I think this generation of entrepreneurs and startups, I feel, must model that behavior, right? That the quality of boards and governance and what we do in terms of reporting and taking investors seriously and inviting people in to look at, what quality reporting and transparency. It doesn't matter if you are touching $1,000 or $10 million of other people's money. The fiduciary is exactly the same. You go to jail as a board member for the same reasons, regardless of the quantity of fraud, right? And I think taking that seriously as board members, taking that seriously as founders, taking that seriously as LPs, and doing more is what we must do.
So thank you for that.
So-
Excuse me. Go ahead, please, Peter.
So I really agree with what Vishal is saying. Like, I want people to see me as a man and not as a Kenyan man, a black man, but I cannot deny that part of me, But what I've seen, and this is just the honest, part of playing in this world as an African, is quite the opposite. When I talk to some of the investors and say, okay, why aren't you investing in this Kenyan company? They're like, well, there's a trust deficit because they're gonna go buy a Range Rover with my money. And a few of them have bought Range Rovers, but I know most of my friends from the US go buy a BMW touring bike, which is the exact same amount of money. So there's a bias in the way we look at, trust and governance. I can tell you the companies I'm working with right now, Market Force 360 is going to close their second round in a COVID year. WorkPay, these are Y Combinator companies. I mean, they have their governance is top notch. We just need to start showcasing, like Dhruv is saying, these companies so that, we can have people in, whether they are local or foreign, to see that the governance, the quality of teams, the quality of product, the month-to-month growth is better with some of these local teams.
So we've heard some great practical suggestions here. Showcasing some case studies about successes. Kian had in the comments, and we need to broadcast things like the Nest more broadly, so to get more people exposed to startups. Is there a forum where we can bring more of these families, and that's where a lot of the institutional wealth is, together and give them more exposure to the opportunities in the startup world? And if we were to do that, how would we do it?
I think
go ahead, please.
Some people are doing it well. Victoria Ventures, Steve Gugu, who they have this kind of like, several month-long kind of like master classes for people to learn how to invest in early stage startups. I think a bigger problem is not whether the money is there, is that our high net worth individuals are used to certain kind of deals. So sometimes they might not look at a startup valuation like international investors will look like. They might want more equity. So there is a language barrier between, the entrepreneurs and the money coming in. So therefore, there to be able to kind of say, okay, this is the globally acceptable standard of investing in early stage companies. Come, let us teach you how to do this. But I keep agreeing that, more forums like this and me being able to meet people in other kinds of circles is kind of very important. Thank you, Jim, for doing that.
Sorry, Jim, you're on mute.
I was saying, just read a quick comment from Mike Watson, who is about to leave us, but he's happy to look at anyone seeking investment at miraminvest.com. Look in the comments. You will find his email. Send a one-pager to Mike if you're looking for investment. Please go ahead, Tony.
No, I was just going to say
Dhruv.
one of the other ones is Invest Africa is an interesting organization. You're having something next week, but one of the founders has actually got a multi-tier. The way I understand it is a multi-tier. In essence, what levels of different WhatsApp groups where people of like-minded interests go in. So actually, even all of this stuff is actually not even happening physically. It's not even on a website or any of those sorts of things. It's actually happening in these sorts of platforms. So just ask them about it. What is it? And I do believe there's a very active VC angel subgroup in that. And in fact, I've got a note here, but I haven't actually made time to actually join that group. I don't know if you guys know Jason Joku, but he's got a very, very active blog in Nigeria, and you pay 1,000 naira or something like that, and you join his Telegram group. And most of the interesting interaction and the, shall we say, feel of West Africa actually happens on that Telegram group. So you've just got to keep your eyes and ears open, but actually spend a bit of time. Yeah.
Gotcha. And by the way, I'm part of that the Invest Africa group, and yes, it's very enlightening, and it's a great way to engage the community. Great, thank you for that. Peter, did you have a comment? You had a comment earlier about no, sorry. Okay.
Yeah. I think, can I just say something?
Yes,
Jim?
please, Tony.
I think so. It's true. There are a myriad. In fact, Invest Africa is one. Jason is another one. There's VC for Africa, which you might know about. Then there are the iHub and NILAB communities. Also, they also have small angel networks. There's the Africa Angel Network as well. There's a number of them, and they are good. It's a good entry point, and we need to grow more of those communities. I think something we could also add is being able to have smaller groups in local areas. So a Nairobi-based group that has an interest in, for example, telehealth, or in fact, taking a lot of what is virtual and also trying to make it more physical for those trust factors, and being able to have small showcase meetups. So brown bags, I've participated in more than 50 brown bags over the last 3 years, where you go to a family home, and then it's an estate home, and in this estate, they call uncles, cousins, brothers, people who have been in a specific sector, and they're like, we have owned publishing houses for a couple of years and being big investors in those, but we're hearing there's a ed tech movement. Do you mind presenting to us and just showing us what that looks like, so we can see alternatives of where we'd put our money? And this is something that was done privately in somebody's home with 5 or 12 odd people. And those brown bags where you just make a small pitch quickly were really added value. I've done that for a couple of CEOs as well. And I've been fortunate to be able to bring a couple of my friends in that. So those small groups of investment committees of 5 to 10 people would actually go also a long way. And those are some things that I would love to see more people do in our local space. But the last one is, I think, just exchanging numbers. Take a phone number, send an email, have a chat, let somebody refer you to somebody else. Do the basics. And those basics will go much further along than sometimes sending cold emails in the hundreds to communities of people around the world that we do not know. I think that has also added a lot of value to investment communities in Kenya.
Well, one thing that I'd like to put on the table as an offer is we do the Nest every week. And the NestCast live sessions are once a month where we talk about a specific topic. But I would like to make the Nest and this whole forum and this time slot and this infrastructure, if you will, available to all for encouraging this networking among the right institutional partners in East Africa. So that could be a session where we invite specifically some of the family offices to come and listen to some of the best East African companies pitch. We could have joint sessions with Invest Africa or even others, so that we can pull people together that otherwise aren't coming together. So I'm here to really open this up to anybody who wants to do it, but we are very open to be part of that project. So I know, Dhruv, you had raised your hand. Did you want to add a comment?
No, I was just clapping, saying thank you very much.
No, that was a clap. Sorry. This technology stuff, I don't know. Great. Well, on that, we're reaching the end of our hour. So I'd like to pass it over back to the panel for last words, last 1 minute thoughts. Who'd like to start?
I can go.
Sure.
Jim, again, thank you for what you're doing to kind of get us together and have this conversation. Tonee, it's been a while. We don't need to be seeing each other on these kinds of panels. I'll come find you. I know about the project you're working with Jesse and them, so I shouldn't be hearing about these things from the side. Dhruv and Vishal, so nice to see you. Thank you for this community. Actually, even you two, I think I'll bring a couple of companies for you guys to actually look at in the next couple of weeks. I think this is the kind of conversation that this needs to be the starting point. I'm available to anyone, and thank you again for having us, Jim.
Thank you, Peter. Dhruv, Vishal,
Allow me
Tonee?
to go next.
Yes, please.
Can I go next?
Yes.
So I think when we started being entrepreneurs, we had no intention of standing up for African entrepreneurs or fighting powers that be in terms of race or social and economic class. We just had an interest. I was a dyslexic student. I struggled through primary and secondary school. And after doing an edtech company and raising $5.5 million for it, I quit that. Very lucrative opportunity because my heart was in education, and I've been doing that for the last 8 years. That's what drives us. We're not driven by trying to be super anything. We're average folk who want to see beautiful things come out of our continent and out of our country. So standing here knowing that I'm fighting to make a business work, but also pushing for social justice for as many African young people as possible is not something we're expected to do. So the more support, partnership, and mentorship we have from people like Vishal and Dhruv as well, the more the chance of us succeeding. And Peter, I'd appreciate the cup of coffee as well, but I definitely want to have tea at Drew's place and just have a chat and have a conversation about real estate and get to learn what that is about. And also sit down with Vishal and understand PwC and what he believes good fiduciary responsibility looks like, and learn from these guys. Because I think at the end of the day, being a representation of a community for anyone in any community is very difficult. But more than that, it's a lucrative, fun journey. We enjoy doing what we do because we love it. We love to get to meet people like Jim. Thanks again for having me here twice, and more people on your panel and who are listening in, because we want to be part of a bigger community that changes the world. We still have this naivete that we can do positive things and change our community and change our continent, because we believe the new narrative of Africa is doing its own thing. Is us. It's not the kids coming after us. It's actually us. We are the Africa that we've been waiting for, and we want to change it. And we need everyone who's listening, who's watching, who's participating in this panel to help us do that, because we're giving our lives for it every day, and we want to make sure we're the best at it, and we don't want to let anyone down. So thanks again for having me, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for those inspirational words. Dhruv, Vishal?
Let me go next. Thank you, Jim and the Nest team, for putting this together. And I've really enjoyed interacting with Tonee and Peter. Dhruv and I speak all the time, so I wouldn't thank him. Look, people like me are not traditional venture capitalists. Okay, we're still learning easy nodes, convertible structures.
And bravo for that, by the way.
Sorry?
I said bravo for that you're not a conventional
Silicon Valley stuff is like a late career stuff for us, right? I'm still learning. I still take courses. I'm still recalibrating. That's not what you call me for. With my 27 years of corporate experience and all the work I've done, Mauritius to Ghana, down to South Africa, if I could bring some general management, talent, mentorship, ability to raise capital, ability to see what's next, help an entrepreneur sort of go through this valley of death that everybody talks about, from sort of, family and friends round to the institutional round, I think that's what you phoned me for, right? That, being able to bring a Rolodex, a network, understand general basic management, all of that stuff, those naked conversations that there's nobody to have with. I'm on your doorstep. I've seen it all, and I've invested my life in trying to elevate African entrepreneurs and African professional talent. I live here. This is me. I am Africa all the time. I pay my taxes here, right? So that's the kind of engagement you want from a local angel and a local entrepreneur. And if you want to be listed on NASDAQ on day 0 or day 2, day 5, and dream of being the next unicorn, do not phone me.
Well, I'd be very happy to invest alongside you any day, Vishal, as we already have. Dhruv.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, fellow panelists, especially Vishal, because he put us in touch. I just want to kick back to where I started off on the introduction. What do I invest in is companies with real solutions. And what I mean by that is anything that can make life easier for all the wananchi and the citizens in Kenya. It doesn't matter which class you come from, right? Yeah. And that's going to have traction. That's going to make money. That's going to actually do something for society. And the entrepreneur is not just there, to promote, just make money. But if it helps with society, I think almost the B Corp values, if I can put it this way, even if you're not certified, doesn't mean you can't have inclusive capital. And that's what drives me to invest in. And as part of all of that, if we can help the ecosystem and help everybody else, it'll be more fun for everybody concerned. So really, I think the more gaps we can bridge, the more communities talk to each other, it's better for everybody anyway. It's just a beneficial side effect. So why not do it? It'll be completely insane if we didn't. So more connections. Absolutely love to have coffee with Peter and a beer with Tonee and Vishal. You're a foodie, so we know where we are coming. All of us are coming to. Thank you for hosting us, and thank you for hosting us, Jim. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you very much. And so I heard more connections, more fun, more money, more everything. So I think on that note, thank you all the panelists for a great discussion, and all the audience for also and Pauline, yes, women are very welcome. Please, please, please. And I seriously regret not working harder to get more women on this panel. So we definitely need more women on this panel, and for other nests as well. And thank you very much, audience, for just being here in general. And I do hope to see you next week. And again, we have a triple header next week with the Nest at various times throughout the day. Please go to our website to find the links and the times. And with that, thanks again, and see you next week.